Good morning. Let's get started. Hope everyone is well. It sounds like a lot of different things are making people happy today. Some of them are autumn. Some of them, the election is almost over. Some of it's a dog sleeping next to you. So make yourself comfortable. We're going to be rolling for the next hour or so. We do have an enormous amount to cover today. We had considered breaking this into two sections, but frankly, so much of your end of year planning is happening right now that it didn't make sense to delay any of it. So I hope you will be patient if we go a little bit quickly today because there's a lot to cover. Welcome to our 20th webinar in the series around non-cash gifts for end-of-year success. Non-cash gifts are one of these things that tends to be a little bit archaic and mundane, but just incredibly important to both your career success, to your individual goal hitting, and then also to the missions of your organization. So I'm excited to dig in with you today. Today's agenda, pretty quickly, intros, why this matters. There's a lot of different non-cash gifts, and we're going to focus a lot on stock giving. And why? Partly because many people don't understand this well enough to hit their goals, and it's probably the thing that's going to get you across the line in the biggest way this year. Also because a lot of the principles here, in terms of how to talk about them, how to message them, are applicable to other types of giving. So we'll focus here, but then make sure that you're taking these learnings and thinking about how these apply to QCDs, DAFs, bequests, some other things as well. So stay tuned there, but there's a lot of cool stuff on stock giving in particular here. A quick note, this is CFRE approved for 1 credit. Actually, all of these sessions are, and so hopefully we've been able to get you over that 15-hour mark, which is the responsibility you have for continuing education. There is a survey that we'll post in at the end, and just make a quick note there, and we'll keep our records up to date for you. So I'm glad this was helpful. My colleague Simone put all the work into making sure this got accredited so that the hour you have here today is even more valuable. Quick intros. I know most of you, but my name is Patrick. I'm the co-founder of Free Will alongside my wonderful and brilliant co-founder Jenny. Well before this, I used to run email fundraising for President Obama and ran the innovation team at change.org, both of which were really, really fun, and I learned a lot. And as always, we're really lucky to work alongside about 70 amazing people scattered around the country. But so much of the work that you're going to see in the next hour is not just from me, but from all these other folks. So huge shout out to all of them. I know some of them are listening. And also we're closing in on $2 billion in gifts, which is really, really exciting. All right, so we asked you how your week was going. A couple of interesting things. A little bit back down on the happiness trend, which is that blue graph that you can see takes a sort of sharp pivot down. People are feeling anxious as the dominant feeling. So if you're feeling anxious, you're not alone, and this is pretty common both within the fundraising world and without. But also people are a little bit more eager. I feel like the end of year giving season is coming, the election's coming, a lot of different things are just around the bend. And so there's a lot to look forward to. I did want to note also that the sort of bottom line, this green line at the bottom, which is loneliness, is ticking up just a little bit. And I do worry about this over the course of the winter, especially for a lot of adults of all ages, as we're inside more and there's sort of less social opportunities. So I hope that this makes you feel a little bit less lonely, on top of makes you a little bit more educated on these topics. And we also asked what you're worried about, and actually we're seeing a little bit downtick in hitting goals, which is really good, although there is an uptick in donors' health and safety. So I know that the coronavirus is spiking in a lot of parts of the Midwest, of the South, of the Sun Belt, and so I hope everyone and all your donors are healthy and safe. One piece of good news I wanted to share is we send a pre-survey around each week, and that's where the results that you just saw come from. But we did get this note, which was really cool. We just received the biggest stock gift ever. Thank you. I think the advice and information you provided through our nonprofit series has been incredibly helpful. That's Caitlin from the Washington Waldorf School. And so congratulations, Caitlin, on landing this huge gift. Pretty exciting, and it also helps set the tone for the rest of the conversation. A lot of these gifts are going to be just enormous and game-changing. So hats off to you, Caitlin, and your whole team at the Washington Waldorf School. So great job. All right, so let's talk about non-cash gifts and how you yourselves are doing. On a scale of 1 to 5, we asked how comfortable you feel. And this sort of confidence interval is a really good indication of how successful you'll be with these types of gifts. So cash gifts, people rank themselves a 4.5 out of 5. In terms of, I feel comfortable talking about this, I feel comfortable marketing. Then we got to bequests, which are 3.5. These tend to be the most straightforward type of plan gifts. Stock gifts, 3.3. Donor advised fund gifts, DAFs, 3.2, QCDs, 2.9. So a lot of different ranges here. And so we'll dig into some of these. And my guess is that hopefully we can get you up to about a 4 as an average by the end of today on stock gifts, and move you up a little bit as well on donor advised funds and stocks and QCDs, excuse me. All right, so why does this even matter? Why focus on non-cash gifts? Cash is easy, it's simple, it's straightforward. Everybody knows what it is. Well, the first reason here is that in this year in particular, we're facing this massive bifurcation of the economy. So small donors are facing challenges while major donors see boom times. And this is across the board. And what we're seeing in most organizations is that major gifts may be going up. Planned gifts are certainly going up, but annual gifts are going down. And this is number 2, is that traditionally, annual giving tends to be relatively steady, but many nonprofits are behind on annual fundraising right now. And that's true because your small donors and your sort of rapid response giving, maybe some events got canceled. And so the most likely route to success here, to the sort of Superman activity that's going to save you, is large non-cash gifts at the end of the year. This will be the difference between success and failure for most folks, which is why I'm so glad you're here. We actually just received this note from one of our religious partners. It said, we've been behind this year on annual giving, and this huge stock gift was such a blessing. And they received a gift from someone who's traditionally a major donor, but suddenly gave a much larger gift because they were making a non-cash gift. And this is what's probably going to turn around their fundraising season. So just to note that this is probably, if you're falling behind, this is the area to invest in and to learn in and get smart about, as well as to market, because it's probably what's going to get you back up to the mountaintop as we go forward. Reason number 3, many of you know this, but it's really, really important to get your head around. Non-cash assets drive long-term success. So our friend Dr. Russell James, pictured here on the right, handsome guy, said an analysis of 1 million nonprofit tax returns showed that organizations that strictly look for cash donations grew by just 11% over a 5-year period. Now, organizations taking any non-cash gifts at all grew by 50%. And organizations that are taking appreciated securities grew by 66%. So 6 times larger just by focusing on some non-cash gifts, in particular securities. So really interesting data there. By the way, if you're a newer nonprofit or a smaller nonprofit, the math for nonprofits that were between $100,000 and $500,000 in fundraising revenue, well, those organizations that took securities grew by 400% over 5 years. Now, the ones that went to cash still grew by more than the average because it's easier for a small organization to grow. But it's that striking. It's that 400% growth is pretty remarkable. And then reason number 4, the biggest reason to focus on non-cash gifts is not that you're going to get a whole bunch of new donors. It's that these gifts tend to be much larger from exactly the same donors. So if you're working with somebody in a one-on-one relationship, it is much easier for you to double the size of the average gift there than it is to double the number of major donors at your organization. And so this is the path to success in the short term. One of the higher ed institutions we've spoken with, and we do tons of interviews for this research, says my biggest gifts are almost always stock. We built buildings with a single stock gift. We need everyone to get smart about this. And so just keep in mind that it's not like you're going to generate a ton of new donors, but you'll get larger gifts from existing donors. All right, so let's talk about understanding the value of stock gifts, and we'll dive in here. So the frame that I want to use on stock gifts and most non-cash is one of kindness for donors. One of the major gifts officers we spoke to at a museum said, I view helping my donors with stock giving as a type of kindness. And this is also going to be true for QCDs or donor advised funds. Really helping donors have more impact for less money is a remarkable thing. And it's one of the things that's in your hands if we can get smart about this. So the key reason, and I know some of you know this, but let's summarize it quickly, is that donors giving stock save on 2 types of taxes at the same time. One, they avoid all capital gains taxes. And also, and people forget this, a lot of capital gains is taxed by a state as normal income tax, with normal income tax. And so that capital gains rate of 15 or 20% is actually considerably higher in many places because it's also being taxed as state income tax. Now, when you donate stock, the donor receives a state and federal income tax deduction for the full present value of the stock, meaning on both federal and state levels, you're saving twice, right? When you're giving stock, you're avoiding the state the state income tax, and you're getting a deduction for the state tax. You're avoiding the capital gains, and you're getting a deduction for your federal taxes. So really important here. And I want to walk through some math. We talked about this a little bit in one of the earlier sessions, but it's really important. And the number of people that emailed me to say, hey, can I have this slide in particular, was higher than any slide in any presentation, which means I know people are still getting their heads around it. So let's meet Mark. Mark lives in California. He donates $500 of Netflix stock to your organization. He bought that stock at $100, by the way. Netflix, by the way, has grown about 500x since 2003, I think, and it's grown about 5 times in the last few years. When he donates this, he avoids $80 in capital gains. He also avoids state income tax at $53 in California. Now, Mark is well-to-do in this context, so he's paying the top marginal tax rates at both federal and state levels. He also avoids federal income tax, meaning he gets a deduction for $500 from his federal income tax, and therefore saves $185 in tax savings. And he gets a state deduction of $66, right, which is about 13% of this $500. So what does that net out to? It means the tax savings associated with this gift is $384, or 77% of the entire gift. So just as a note here, that means that for every 23 cents that really reasonably leaves Mark's pocket, he's getting $100 or $1 of impact, which is pretty remarkable. And you can see why this is going to generate so much more giving from the same people when they say, wow, I could really be out a couple $1,000s, but give a $10,000 gift. That's really, really compelling. There's a question here is, would the donor get the federal deduction if they don't file state taxes? In Texas, we only file federal income tax, so it depends on the state. Great question. Well, let's meet Rachel from Texas, and we picked Rachel as an example of someone who doesn't have state taxes. So places like New Hampshire, Washington State, Nevada, Texas, Florida, a couple other places don't have any state income tax at all. So this is sort of the bottom end of the spectrum. Well, she still saves $80 in federal taxes. She does not pay state income tax, as we mentioned. She does save the same federal income tax deduction. She does not get additional state income tax savings. And still, her total's over 50% in terms of the gifts, in terms of the cash that she's saving by not paying, avoiding capital gains taxes and saving on her taxes. So still an outlay, but she's more than doubling the impact of her gift for what it costs her, which is really, really powerful. So if you're in Texas, this is still an incredibly powerful tool. If you're in New York or California, it's even more powerful. And I would suggest that if you're in California or New York or Massachusetts or some of these other places with high taxes, this should be potentially the top focus of your organization, because it's so important for your donors, and the gifts that you'll get are going to be so much larger. So let's see what that looks like in practice. Well, the average number of stock gifts per year from you all is about 52. So some really major gifts. The average size of those gifts in the survey was 14,800. Now, what's interesting is in the tool that we have and the data that we're looking at, we see the average size of stock gifts to be about 31,000. And so what's the difference there? It's hard to know. We have seen a bunch of really large gifts which skew that average, but it is likely that your $1 million gifts and up are going to be coming in the form of stock, as well as many of your $100,000 gifts and up. So keep note, these are often the same people that might be giving gifts of a couple of $1,000s and are then shifting to $15,000 gifts because they're giving stock. So how do we actually get these gifts? Let's talk through a couple of key tactics here to make you much more effective. The first is using what we call social proof. So social proof means that people are very interested in learning what people like them are doing. It would be much more compelling for me to say, listen, all these other gift officers and leaders in the fundraising world are getting much smarter about stock than to tell you you should get smarter at stock. It's a very different context. 2, learning what other people in their peer group do drives action, especially in what we call low information environments. Meaning when people don't really know what to do, they're highly susceptible and highly influenced by things like social proof. We see this a lot in plan giving where it's basically a black box to almost everybody, and a little bit of nudging around, hey, this is what many people do, has outsized impact. And then this is really interesting. Social proof is low pressure but high impact. So you can have a one-on-one conversation with a donor and not feel like you're putting them on the spot, because all you're doing is sharing what other people are doing. And yet it's actually more impactful than frankly a less comfortable conversation where we just say, hey, you should probably think about giving stock. Telling that donor what other people are doing is easier for you and also higher impact at the same time. So here's what that looks like. We're gonna talk to Mark. Mark, don't say, hey, you should make a stock gift for these reasons. Say something like, Mark, I thought of you because another longtime donor from California just made a gift of stock and was thrilled to save so much on her taxes while having a huge impact. Can I share more about what she did? And when you say this question, can I share more about what someone else did? The answer is almost always yes. If you said, Mark, you should make a gift of stock, do you want to learn more? He might say, I'm not really ready for that right now. But learning about other people is much lower pressure for both of you and still more influential. Tip 2, by the way, is around acknowledging surprise. So you want to use the word surprise or unexpected to trigger this feeling of people being more likely to learn new things when you start by acknowledging that it might be surprising to them. This puts people in an open mental state of mind and reduces defensiveness. It's even stronger when paired with social proof. So let's look at that some more. Don't say, Mark, stock gifts are better for you and better for us. Do say, Mark, that other donor, just like many people we speak to, was surprised to learn how beneficial stock giving can be for both her and the impact she wants to have. Can I share what she learned? And this is very gentle, easy, but also just incredibly, incredibly compelling when we look at the research. Tip 3, this is one of the things that is super underutilized, but incredibly impactful. So what that looks like is you want to build trust by being helpful. And many of you act as advisors on how people might effectively give to your organization. But there's one more step that you can take, which will still result in better outcomes for you. So virtually all of your donors give to more than one cause. But by sharing how to give more effectively to any nonprofit, you'll create a stronger relationship and a more open mind. The more a donor gives stock to any organization, the more they'll give to you. And you'll build a lot of trust by saying, look, if you're going to give anywhere, this is something you should learn about. And it creates a much more open dialogue as opposed to when you make your gift to the college this year, this is how you might want to give. So in practice, you might want to say, Mark, I hope this is helpful to you for any of your giving, to our organization or elsewhere. This can help you both save money and have a bigger impact on anything you care about. Tip 4 is avoiding jargon and complexity. A lot of people fall into this trap when we talk about non-cash assets. Simpler and more concise is always more effective. In the last session we talked, where we really went deep on the written word and effective writing for planned and major giving. One of the studies we showed is that emails written at a 3rd grade level perform about 34% better than emails written at a college level. And the same is true in one-on-one conversations as well. So you still want to mention tax savings because people have 43% more interest when you say something like, avoid capital gains by making a gift of stock compared to simply making a gift of stock. But you also want to keep it simple and straightforward and avoid the jargon. Here's what that might look like. If you're framing tax savings, you might say, Mark, the reasons some folks like you prefer to give stock is because it can save them money on 2 types of taxes. In a state like yours, people can save even more than 70% of their gift. Now, what you'll see here is there's basically no jargon, nothing that a 2nd grader or a 3rd grader might not know besides the concept of taxes if they don't have a job. And it's very simple. Now, once someone says, okay, I'm interested in learning more, you want to keep it simple, and it's just very easy. People who choose to give stock avoid all capital gains taxes on what they donate, on top of getting a deduction on income taxes for the current value of their stock. It's a little more wonky, but still very simple. Now, there are a couple of things that many of us know. You want to wait at least a year holding that stock before you give it. It's always better to sell appreciated assets than depreciated. But once you're really far down the line and figuring out what stock to give, that's when you have that conversation, not up front, right? We want to make sure it's simple and straightforward, and we can help guide people at every point in the process. Okay, this is really, really interesting research that my colleague Magdalena unearthed. So this idea of treating a gift as unusual as opposed to regular, which might not really fall into your normal cadence. But framing a donation as exceptional, uncommon, and infrequent removes it from comparisons with regular disposable income. And it drives much more charitable giving. In fact, the study that we looked at showed that giving went up by 1/3 just with this simple framing switch. So a simple switch in wording in, say, only once a year versus annual. Now, these mean the same thing, right? Only once a year and annual mean the same thing. One feels exceptional. This is a unique occasion. The other one makes it feel regular and constant. And that any gift now, you're sort of baking yourself into giving consecutively. And so this only once a year framing is much, much higher value for you to use in your conversations. So seeing in action, Giving Tuesday happens only once a year, and it's coming up. Some people have chosen to mark the occasion with their first stock gift. You can see how this feels special and unique and maybe worthy of a little bit extra attention and effort. So this is a really big opportunity here. I hope that makes sense. I will stick around, by the way, for extra questions this time because this is so important. And I know it's confusing to some folks, given that we averaged out to a 3, means there's a lot of 1s and 2s in stock giving, but it's really, really important. Now, this is a minor thing, but actually something that almost every nonprofit gets wrong. And actually, it helps you lose out on a lot of gifts. So I want to walk through something very specific on your websites, which most folks are doing incorrectly. So when you have stock giving, or really any type of giving on your website, there's 3 goals that you have. One is you want to give donors who already want to make a gift an easy path to doing so. So if I'm a donor, I'm trying to give Kmart stock away, I want to make sure that it's a seamless process. You also want to capture information of people who are browsing or interested, but may not complete a gift without your help. So that's a big shift as well. And then the third is you want to provide education to people who are curious about stock giving. So you have these 3 buckets of people, right? One, I'm ready to make a gift. I'm sort of ready to make a gift, but I may or may not finish it based on how hard it is or other things. And you probably want to do a follow-up phone call to help me get that gift across the line. And then 3, I'm pretty new to stock giving. I'm just here to learn more. I'm probably not going to make a gift, but maybe sometime in the future. So those are our 3 audiences. By the way, the really important thing before we get to the mistake is that everyone understands transfer instructions. So very basically, transfer instructions are the information that a donor or a financial advisor of a donor needs to transfer stocks from their account to yours. Everyone has this. Anyone who's taking stocks has these, but not everybody knows about it, so we just wanted to clear it up. This includes usually the name of the broker, the address, the account number, something called the DTC number, which is critical for a bunch of these transactions. You don't need to know exactly what that is, just that it exists. So the first mistake is that a lot of people put transfer information directly on your website. This is a classic mistake. Why is it a mistake? It has 3 big risks. Donors make a gift, but the brokerage doesn't share information. Meaning I get 10,000 shares of Apple from Fidelity. It's a massive gift, and I don't know what donor it came from. If I'm a college or university, I don't know what funds to put it in. It's probably not going to go to the general fund. It's probably going to undergraduate scholarships or engineering school or something like that. And yet suddenly we have this massive gift and a donor goes unthanked, unstewarded, can't ask them again. And they're probably pretty angry because they never get an acknowledgement of the largest gift of their life. And most donors don't know that information is not being transferred. Second problem, which is in that category 2, is the donor starts to make a gift, but for any reason doesn't finish. Someone who's halfway through a stock gift is your #1 top lead of the organization. You really want to get in touch with that person and close the gift. But if we don't know who's starting and stopping, it's just sort of a black hole of information, and you're out of luck. And then the third, by the way, and this is a minor risk, I don't want to overstate it, but if you just have your account information public on the website in plain text, you have web crawlers, which are a form of computer hacking, that are sort of gathering information and may increase risk of fraud if you just have your account information straight out there. So first mistake is putting transfer information directly on the website. Now, the second mistake is not putting it on the website. So stick with me here. There are also key risks if you don't put it on the website. The first one, by the way, is that younger donors, and in this case, we'll say younger donors are 30 to 55 or so, are less willing to talk to strangers, and they're hesitant to reach out to your organization. The second thing is that donors who are more likely to try to make a gift on nights or weekends, literally anyone who's working is unlikely to be making a lot of these gifts at 3 p.m. Eastern time, which is exactly when you are less likely to respond if you have this thing where we're saying, email or call us to get the right information. If you're calling a phone number and no one's going to pick up after 5:30, which is exactly what I'm sitting down to make my stock giving, that is a huge problem. Now, pop this in the chat, by the way. Does anyone know what the highest giving date of the year is? I'll give you 10 seconds to make guesses here. Yeah, so basically everyone says December 31st, which is correct. Now, let's sort of follow this thread. If you don't have stock transformation on your website, we have the problem is when giving at the end of the year, donors do not trust that you'll respond in time. Now, the biggest giving day of the year is December 31st. Now, you may or may not be in your office. You may or may not be answering the phone. This goes all the way up to midnight on the West Coast here. So it might be 3 a.m. in New York, if that's where you're stationed, and you're obviously not getting back to folks in time. And so a donor who's finally getting around to making a major gift is totally unable to do so because you're not responding on the busiest giving day of the year. Even if you station someone, there's still that delay, and knowing, even if you are more responsive, that donor looks and says, wow, I can't email the Red Cross or I can't email this nonprofit and expect that they're gonna get back to me in 10 minutes on New Year's Eve. And so we end up making a much smaller gift of cash. And you're losing out on very, very large gifts that way. So this is a simple tweak. And here's what the solution is, right? If you can't put it on, we can't not put it on, how do we solve that problem? It's pretty straightforward. So what you want to do is you want to collect donor information first, meaning if you can get information and then reveal the transfer instructions, you'll stop receiving stock gifts without donor information. Gift officers can follow up with in-progress gifts, closing way more gifts and hitting their goals. And then third, you want to reduce the risk of fraud. So that's really key. And fourth, by the way, you have an end to delays, meaning someone can just type in their information and immediately get the DTC and the other transfer instructions. And so if it's 10 p.m. on New Year's Eve, it's still right there for me and I can process my gift. And therefore I don't shift away from a $20,000 stock gift and instead make a $2,000 cash gift. So really, really important stuff. We actually just wrote an article on LinkedIn about this that happy to share afterwards in case your IT team needs convincing. But this is one of the biggest mistakes that we see, and it's totally solvable. And frankly, if you take a couple days to solve it, it will be true for the rest of your existence as long as that website doesn't change. So really easy to solve, but a huge area where people don't understand how many gifts they're losing out on. By the way, Miriam notes, when I worked in development for a university, we had staff working long hours at year end, available to answer the phone live. And so we already talked about how donors don't know that. But think about this, if you can get that right, you might be able to save yourself some really late nights towards the end of the year. So here's what this looks like on our friends over at St. Ignatius High School. You can see at this bottom, it says access transfer information, right? Very straightforward, very simple if you're looking at the stock giving portion of their website. And so then you type in a couple of easy things, very simple, and then they're revealing their account information after you fill it out, right? So it's very simple, it's a two-step process. But what happens is they have all the information of everybody who's making a gift, who might make a gift, and then that person can access it in real time. So really powerful stuff here. One of these things that is so mundane as to be almost not worth talking about, except for the fact that it is super important in terms of actually generating a lot of giving. So we always look for what are the things that don't take a lot of effort and will result in outsized impact for you because you have so little time on your hands. And this is one of those key things that just making this slight shift will result in a lot more giving. By the way, if you're a FreeWill partner and you want to make this change, just reach out and we'll sort of provide language or anything else to help you because it's important to get this right and get it up and running before Giving Tuesday, as well as certainly before the end of the year. The other thing I want to note on stocks is you all are sort of average of 3 out of 5, even though this is going to be one of the most important things to your career success. And so we spent a lot of the last few weeks creating what we call a stock masterclass. So this is it's 8 lessons. They're not very long, so don't get too, it's 10 lessons, excuse me. Most of them are 6 minutes or less. And it really guides you through the different types of giving, the different tax implications on donors, how to talk to donors. We want some role plays, how to write to donors, how to put it on your website, all these things. And so this is, usually we create these classes only for FreeWill partners, but we sort of looked up and said, wow, this is what's gonna, stock giving is one of the things that's gonna save the nonprofit sector this year. So it's free for everybody until the end of the year, including folks who are not on this call, but work in your organization. So I think it's 1.5 CFRE credits. We're actually trying to revise it up to 2, and we'll keep you updated if that happens. But just make a note in the survey if you'd like to receive the class. And it's we go really, really in depth on not just sort of the why of stocks, but also sort of tactical steps. So do that. It's been a lot of work from a lot of people, but we hope that you like it. And frankly, we hope that you raise a bunch of 6- and 7-figure gifts using the class. Okay, so that's stock gifts. Let's talk briefly about QCDs. We'll talk briefly about donor advised funds. We'll talk very briefly about bequests, and then we'll get into some questions and answers. So the basics of QCDs, and I wanted to go back to the basics because people's confidence here is so low. So QCDs, by the way, are the fastest growing type of giving, even more than donor advised funds. So let's look at what this means. You have to be at least 70.5 years old. You can take a distribution from your IRA directly. Now, if you have what's called an RMD. So everyone knows what an IRA is, I hope. It's a retirement account similar to a 401k that you yourselves probably have right now. An IRA, then, once you hit a certain age, the government says you have to take money out of your IRA. Why? Because the money you're putting into your 401k or your IRA right now is untaxed. And the government says, look, we're going to not take taxes immediately, but we do want taxes on that at some point. And so once you get old enough to be in retirement age, you need to start taking money. This distribution age, for the most part, is 72 now. If you don't take it, you get a 50% penalty on it. So everyone takes it because the tax penalty is so big. If you do take it, you're paying up to 37% income tax on this. Now, coming back to our states, if you're in California, if you're in New York, if you're in Massachusetts, et cetera, you're paying even more, right? And this is at the higher rates. At the lower rates, you all know how marginal taxes work. But you're paying some income tax regardless of your income level. But if you give it as a QCD, remember a QCD is a qualified charitable distribution, it's tax-free. And it's tax-free because actually it lowers your income instead of counting it as deductions. And we'll talk about why that's so important in a moment. But so for every 70.5-year-old with an IRA, they should strongly consider QCDs, because what you can see is that this is pre-tax money as opposed to the post-tax money that's sitting in your bank account. So if you're over 70.5, all of your donors should be doing this, and many of your donors are. I mean, most of you have a mental model of what percentage of donors are over 70. It's probably the largest age group. For some of you, it may be a majority of your donors. Thank you, Lauren, by the way. Ryan asks, well, what does RMD stand for? Lauren said required minimum distribution, which means the amount of money that the government says you have to take at least this much money out of your IRA every year. So thank you, Lauren. And thanks for everyone who's sort of piping into the chat to help everybody else. It's really nice as a community. So why IRA QCD gifts have grown off the charts. So from 2017 to 2018, they grew by 74%. From 2018 to 2019, they grew by 2/3. And the combination of that, which is how multiplication works, is that they've grown almost 3x in 2 years, which is pretty remarkable, and nothing's come close to that. So why did this happen? Well, it turns out that the Republican Congress and President Trump enacted tax reform in 2017, and that took effect in 2018. Now, what did that do? It did two things. And the effect it had, well, it did plenty of things besides affecting charitable giving. But the things here that's really interesting is it drove down the number of people that made itemized deductions on their tax returns. So how did it do that? Well, in the first, it limited what we call the standard minimum deduction, which means regardless of what happens, you get at least this deduction, and that went up. It almost doubled for a lot of folks. So it means you had to get over that threshold to start itemizing deductions. Now, the second thing it did is it capped the amount of money you could deduct on mortgages. If you had a large home, you could only cap, I think, the first $1 million of the mortgage on the interest. And it capped the amount you could deduct in state and local taxes. So a lot of people in blue states were really mad about this. That's a topic for a different time. But that mortgage interest and those state and local taxes are what was driving people, for the most part, over that minimum standard deduction. And so the shift happened in that 30% of people itemized deductions in 2017, and only 9% are going to do it this year. And the 9% is roughly true for the last 2 years as well. And so now, if we're not itemizing deductions, charitable giving doesn't really have a tax benefit for most people. Now, there is the $300 above the line deduction this year, but that's an exception. So what we saw here is, the average size of a QCD, similar to stocks, is $7,000. Now it's less than stocks, but what we mean in the similarity is that the same people who are going to give cash would give a much smaller gift in cash than they do when they make a QCD. A couple of updates for this year in particular. Well, we asked about what RMDs are. There are no RMDs in 2020. This is because when the stock market crashed in March and April, the government said, whoa, we're not going to make people take their investments out with the market down so much. Now, the market's obviously come back up, and the government probably wishes it had that tax money. But in this case in particular, there are no mandatory distributions in 2020. But QCDs are still up by 20% compared to last year. Now, why would that be? It's because people have gotten used to this type of giving. They are seeing the tax benefits of giving pre-tax money even when they're not required to do so. And so they're up by 20%. We should expect, by the way, a significant growth in 2021 when RMDs are back and more donors know about these. Roberta asked, does this pertain to RMDs from 401ks? These are only from IRAs, but most people roll their 401k into an IRA at a later stage in life. The other important thing, and this might be a little bit advanced for some folks, but many of you who are consistently raising QCDs know that traditionally you sort of want to have a cutoff to make sure that you can get that gift in the door and recorded so that no one sort of misses that deadline, that December 31st deadline, and gets hit with a huge tax penalty. Well, now remember, there's no tax deadline this year. And so if someone's mailing you a QCD on December 27th, it's not really a problem. I mean, so it's a very different thing that's true for this year only, and then you're going to have to go back. All right, so let's talk about how to close QCDs. Well, the things that are that work for stock are also true here. Social proof, surprise, also really key on QCDs. The same note on websites, by the way, is really key. People get mystery QCDs all the time, or people start and stop QCDs. So all the same information I shared on stock websites is true for QCDs. You want to include these, by the way, in every year-end appeal. So not just your sort of special major donor correspondence, but anytime you're asking for cash in an email and a letter, you want to include an option for QCDs because so many of your donors over 70 will be making this way preferred. And if you can get that gift from a QCD instead of cash, you'll end up with a much larger gift. All right, let's talk about donor advised funds quickly, and then we'll get to some questions after a short note on bequests. So 32% of you said increasing donor advised funds is a priority. Another 49% said it's a somewhat high priority. So 31% said very high, 49% said somewhat high. So pretty serious. That little green sliver is not a priority at all. Why? Maybe because money in DAFs is continuing to grow. In 2018, there was $121 billion in donor advised funds. So about 20-ish billion comes out every year, but 120 billion in the funds. Part of this is more money is going in. Part of it is that the money in there is growing thanks to a strong stock market. So a couple of tips here. One, DAF giving should be available every time you request a gift via marketing. So something like if you have a checkout page, you want to do things like give from my donor advised fund. You might want to have a checkbox. I have a donor advised fund and I would like to learn more about giving to your organization this way. And you also, in every survey you want to have, just ask people, many of our donors choose to give from donor advised funds. Do you want more information about this? In major donor conversations, that element of social proof that we talked about earlier is really key here. All right, friends, so back, our internet cut out over here. So thanks for being patient with me as we'll see if we can get the slides back up in a moment. A couple things I wanted to note here as we get into donor advised funds. So there's information that you want to put on your website, and that basically says, listen, not your donor advised fund may or may not tell us. So if you make a gift, just shoot an email over here. The second thing I wanted to note, though, about donor advised funds is what we're seeing is that donor advised funds, and this is a little controversial, but it's becoming increasingly a priority for a lot of different organizations, right? And a lot of times, we'll hear from folks that say, my board, my executive director really, really wants me to look at donor advised funds and get smarter about this. And I don't know what to do because we don't know who has donor advised fund gifts. Um, we don't know where to get them. We don't know how to steward them. And there is a lot of work that you can do here in order to improve it. But also the case that that getting really, really good at donor advised fund gifts, the actual best way to do this is to get really, really good at stock gifts. And the one thing that most people don't know is that, you know, it's not simply that people are just sort of dropping donor advised funds, money into donor advised funds because they prefer to give later as opposed to sooner. It's that donor advised funds are incredibly good at taking stock gifts and soliciting stock gifts. So this stat really blew my mind and changed the way I looked at donor advised funds. 60% of all giving going into donor advised funds is stock or non-cash gifts. 60%. And so what that means is that people are looking for a way to give stock away, and because the organizations that they normally give to aren't sort of repeatedly marketing this or making it really easy for them, then instead what happens is they just give it to donor advised funds, and hopefully eventually comes back to that organization over the years. But instead, what we should really think about is how do we get that money before it goes into the donor advised fund? And frankly, that's the best way to get the quote unquote good at donor advised fund is to get that. So think about that as we go forward. And then the last thing I want to say on donor advised fund is that board members and previous board members are very likely to be have donors. I'm gonna actually give me. Okay, great. We are back on computer. So thank you everyone in particular for your patience here. We'll wrap up quickly. But this is one of those things that happens in 2020. All right, so we're back here. The thing that I was noting is that your past board members are very likely to have donor advised funds. And we often don't engage previous board members enough. We certainly engage our existing board members, but from a demographic standpoint, from a psychographic standpoint, this is really key. So just make a list this week of previous board members and call them or check in. And they're a great source of potential large gifts, especially because these tend to be the folks that are, you know, their investments have matured. They're sort of in a really good place financially for many of them, and yet not quite as engaged as they might have been 10 years ago or 5 years ago. And so they might really, really enjoy hearing from you and understanding what the organization is up to. All right, so this is the point that I made earlier, but I think the internet was a little choppy. So I just want to make it again. When we think about getting good at donor advised funds, potentially the best way is to get great at stock giving. So 60% of all funds going into DAFs are in non-cash assets, mostly stock. So this creates a really big opportunity to get money before it goes in. DAFs make it much easier than you do, frankly, to give non-cash gifts, which is why they're growing so quickly. But that money could be diverted earlier right to your organization. So if you can make it easy and accessible, people will think first, well, let me just give this away right now instead of giving it away in the future. So when your boss tells you, I need you to get better at DAFs, go explore this, you might want to say, okay, great. What if we got the money before it went into a donor advised fund in the first place? And this is the way to do it. A quick note on bequests before we wrap up. One is that on Giving Tuesday, which is really important, research shows that people have a strong preference for taking more than one action. So planned giving, which is not typically really a big focus at end of year, should be one of the asks you make on Giving Tuesday, because people will likely do multiple things. And so this is a really good way to get a bunch of cash gifts or non-cash gifts and get a bunch of new planned gifts as well. The second note here on bequests is that end of year giving is the best moment to learn more about your supporters. We just talked about how December 31st was the biggest day of the year in terms of giving. Well, that's the moment that we can learn more about them and bring them into the fold to make them major donors and stronger donors overall. So every thank you should include a brief survey to help get to know the donor. You can do this in Google Forms. It doesn't have to be fancy or expensive. You can also ask whether they've made a planned gift or want to learn more. Ideally, the survey is like 8 to 12 questions, including what motivates them to care. So a couple of quick learnings there, but one of the things where you should be able to uncover a bunch of new gifts or new prospects just with a slight tweak to the automatic thank you that you send out with a donation. All right, so that's all of our new content. Quick thing on resources, just as a reminder, make a note in the survey if you'd like to receive the masterclass. It's also the case that we would encourage you to share this with other people in your organization. So if your organization is smarter about this collectively, you'll end up seeing a lot better results, as we talked about earlier. And then also for Free Will Partners, I also want to remind you that there's a QCD masterclass available. And so take a look in your partner portal for that as well. In a few weeks, we're going to do a community hangout post-election, which is just a place to connect. And so this is the first time we're doing it. You want to RSVP in the survey if you don't mind. This is going to be capped to 200 people because of Zoom limitations on breakout rooms. Thursday, if you're interested, there's a demo of planned and major giving tools and a couple of case studies on how people are using technology to improve planned giving and major giving if you're up for it. So feel free to join that also in the survey. And then next week, in 2 weeks, 2 weeks, by the way, we will be already after the election. So first, my colleague Simone's going to drop the Zoom survey in the Zoom chat. So please fill that out. It is a lot of work for us to do these. All we ask is that you fill this out to help us be a little bit better next time, besides getting better internet. And then the next webinar in 2 weeks is going to be a week after the election. And so what we'll do there is we'll either sort of talk about how to navigate uncertainty, if that's where we are, or depending on a clear victor, we will also walk through some of the likely legislative changes that will happen based on the election results to look at how different types of giving might change. And so there's a bunch of really interesting things. Just as a very short preview, I think you guys remember that slide with Mark in California. Now there's a world where capital gains taxes are going to go up, potentially to the same rate as income taxes. Now, why is that interesting? Well, plenty of reasons why it's interesting to change tax policy in America. What it means is that in a place like California, if these policies get enacted, it may be cheaper in some rare cases to donate stock than it is to keep it. I don't mean you're saving some money on your gift. I mean saying that you have more money in your bank account, and as your net worth is higher by donating stock than keeping it, because some of the changes that are at least proposed. And so we'll really dive in there, and that will be really, really interesting. And then lastly, if you have anything you want to share, if you have creative ideas, if you have questions, I know that some of this might have been a lot, so feel free to reach out to me. I'm just Patrick at Free Will, and I wanted to say thank you again for joining, and thank you for dealing with some technical difficulties, which I'm sure you've all had at different points in your Zoom year. So let's get a couple of questions in. You can stick around for probably a few minutes after 1 o'clock, but also feel free to hop off if you have other things to do. So question, Nicole asked, do donors get federal deductions if they don't file state taxes? Yes, and we did walk through that Texas example. James says, the more appreciated the stock, the better, no? And what he means is that the more a stock has gone up in price from what you paid for it, the better it is to donate. So that's true. It means your capital gain has increased and your tax savings will as well. So the more that a stock has gone up, the better it is to donate. Appreciated is just a fancy way of saying it's worth more now than it was when you paid for it. Sam asks, what % of AGI, which means adjusted gross income, can a donor deduct for appreciated securities and non-cash gifts? So for appreciated securities and things like mutual funds and stocks, the donor can donate up to 30% of their AGI, meaning they can't pay zero taxes, but they can cut their taxes by up to 30%. Now, that might be a good start, and it's good news. There's also something called the carry forward rule, which means that you can take that 30% and up to 5 years in the future, you can deduct more and more of your income. So if you give away a whole bunch of money and it's more than 30%, well, you can take some of it this year, up to 30%, you can take up to 30% next year, in the following year, et cetera. So even that gift this year may have tax benefits for up to 5 years in the future. if you are exceeding that 30%. So it all adds up over time, and you can have really, really big savings. Do stock gifts made on 12/31 count towards that year's taxes? Do transfers get marked for 12/31? So yes, if a gift leaves the donor's account, in most cases, they will count towards that tax year. So that's why that transfer instructions is so key to have on your website. So someone can log into Schwab or call that financial advisor and say, make the transfer, make it before midnight, and that gift comes through to you. Grace asked, Patrick mentioned that it would help people make last minute gifts, but how did that stay true if it's 3 a.m.? Grace, that was a note that basically if you're a New York-based nonprofit, your donor might be making gifts up to midnight on the West Coast. So it's still 2020 in their time zone, and yet it's 3 a.m. yours. So that's the difference there, that if you're an East Coast based nonprofit with some West Coast donors, you need to make sure you're getting folks through the night. It's also another reason to have that automated, because if your office closes at 5 p.m., it means West Coast donors can't make a gift after 2 p.m., which is not that good. Okay, a couple of other questions. Should we expect a drop in giving if Biden wins the election? This is a great question. I will talk more about it in our next section. You'll probably see two different countervailing tensions here. The first is that if you are a progressive or a liberal nonprofit, you will likely see a drop in giving. So people get energized when the opposing party is in power. Now, if you're a conservative nonprofit, you may see an increase in giving if Biden's elected. Now, the second thing is if Biden's elected and Democrats take the Senate, they are likely to make some tax changes, which will increase taxes on the highest earners and the highest capital gains rates. And that should drive an increase in taxes because the opportunity cost of keeping that money is lower, or the opportunity value of keeping that money is lower than in a world where you have lower taxes. So another way to say that is, I get more cash in my pocket from selling a stock, and when capital gains taxes are lower. When capital gains taxes are higher, I get less money selling the same stock, so I'm more willing to donate. Haley asks, do you suggest selling the stock immediately upon receiving it? Generally, yes. So unless you are an extremely sophisticated organization with an investment team, even in that case, you generally want to do it, you sell it. You can always reinvest and buy that stock back if you want to, but the donor receives a deduction based on the price that day when you sell it. So it's sort of an act of kindness to your donor to give them certainty around what kind of deduction they can take. Great, so I think that is it from questions for the moment. It's 1 o'clock sharp on the East Coast. It's 10 a.m. on the West Coast, and I know everyone has lots and lots of work to do as we lean into end of year. So a huge thank you again, both for joining and for all the work that you're doing. Thanks for your patience with technical difficulties, and I hope to see you in 2 weeks. And I can't believe that by the time we talk again, an election will have come and gone. So we'll see, it might be a very different place. So thank you again, and look forward to seeing you all very soon.